If it was possible to match writers against the age I got introduced to them, then Rollan Seisenbayev would be the writer of my adolescence. After all, I was a teenager when I first got acquainted with his works, and it was then that I immediately became his faithful reader. Biknur Kisikov, writer, author of numerous novels, stories, and poems, member of jury of literature contest, inspirer and organizer of Kityap Fest Festival. His first novel that I read was The Satan's Throne, a poignant work distinguished not only by its exciting plot, but also by a frank narrative, so unusual for that sugar-coated Soviet reality. Much later, in the 1990s, I came across an article reporting about Rollan Seisenbayev's initiative to open the Abai House in London. It was such a daring and adventurous thing to do. But apparently, this is what Rollan Seisenbayev is, a brave and daring person, ready to weather any storms and not devoid of adventurism. In addition, he is a champion in Kazakh wrestling, freestyle wrestling, and sambo, an accomplishment which I am sure has hugely impacted his personality. Rollan studied geophysics. However, his choice of education was not defined by his calling. He started writing when he was a student. After graduation, for some time, he worked as a journalist in a newspaper and then on television. And it was then that he became confident that literature was his real calling. He published his first book, a collection of short stories and novellas called Thirst, in 1975. This work immediately attracted the attention of both critics and readers. In the same year, he published the collection of stories named Looking for Myself, which brought him fame. He became a laureate of the Lenin Komsomol Prize of Kazakhstan and the All-Union Competition of Young Playwrights. And although his literary talent was unconditionally recognized by many, his real roaring triumph occurred 11 years later with the publication of the novel Satan's Throne, where he described the lives of imprisoned people. In Moscow, the novel was published in 2 million copies, becoming a huge bestseller. Accomplished literary scholars and critics such as Viktor Badikov, Harold Belger, Murat Awezov, and others wrote extensively about the significance of Seisenbayev's works. But he has never been a self-important person. In fact, all his life he was trying to give back to the community and to the world. For example, in 1992, he opened a charity foundation for children, victims of nuclear tests. Also, as Abai's countryman and big admirer, he always tries to popularize the works of the great poet. He created the World of Abai television program, founded the International Abai Club, and opened the Abai House in London. Within the framework of the Republican One Country, One Book initiative, a 30 Books to the 30th Anniversary of Independence exhibition took place in Almaty. Among those 30 selected books was the work by the famous Kazakh poet and writer Yuri Serebryansky, entitled The Book of Delicious and Healthy Kazakh Literature. This collection of essays is dedicated to those domestic authors whose works were created within the period of independence. In his essays, Serebryansky often refers to Olga Markova, a Kazakh writer, literary critic, and founder of the Public Fund for the Development of Culture and the Humanities, Musaget. Also, the author often mentions such writers as Mikhail Zemskov, Lilia Kalaus, Bakhidjan Kanapyanov, and many others. As many believe, the book has become an interesting representation of the literary environment of independent Kazakhstan. Rollan Seisenbayev has penned many novels and stories. All of them are extremely bright and thoughtful, and, as many would say, considered must-reads. But today we will be talking about one particular book, namely his philosophical novel, The Dead Wander in the Sands. This work tells a story of the Aral Sea fishermen who are about to lose their Kokteniz, blue sea, in which they see the greatest meaning of their lives. The plot revolves around Kahraman Nasirov, manager of the fishing industry, an invincible leader fighting for the salvation of the sea. Kahraman is tough, severe, and restless. His father, a very religious man called Nasir is a totally different person. He always prays to the Almighty God, begging him to make the sea return back to its shores. Although these two protagonists have two opposite personalities, they both are united in their desire to save the Aral Sea. However, no matter how wise and enlightened Nasir is, he cannot comprehend the indifference of authorities, who seem not to care much about the death of the sea. 5 secretaries of the regional committee have changed in this area over the past 20 years. Each of them started anew, undermining all the work done by their predecessors. And still, they all have failed big time. Now, not even a piece of arable land can be found on the banks of the Blue Sea. We can't feed our small flock of sheep in order to keep them full. We have to bring hay from other regions. And that's what Nasir can't understand. Why hasn't there been even a single person in this region, anyone who could point out the mistakes of these former secretaries? In Nasir's understanding, perestroika was something that has only scratched the surface. Those people who leave their offices at 5 have only changed slogans and portraits. Their perestroika was in living carefree, living unbothered. But it is not only regional managers that Nasir is angry at. He is unhappy with the Moscow scientists who proved to be no different to the Almaty and Kizlyarda officials in their indifference. And then I thought, if we destroy this sea, destroy the lives of people who live here, tomorrow it will turn out to be a great sin. Our children will condemn us. They already hate us. I wish I died in that battle for Moscow in 1941, holding my rifle. I wish I wasn't alive today. We thought once the war was over, we could be happy. We were building new things, sparing no effort, and here we are, fighting this new invisible war. And there is no way to understand who is against us. Authorities? God? The man himself? We just want some mercy for the people. Let them be. They deserved it, didn't they? You should stop shooting them, destroying them in your camps, lying to their faces, promising that never-reachable communism. And now you just exterminate men, as if they are the worst, the most wretched animals of all. Professor Slavikov is right. No one wants these miserable people. Officials got their revenue from that Uzbek cotton deal, and those people, all they got is misery, pure misery. And there's nothing worse than this grief of witnessing people die out. Doctors have calculated that every 100 out of 1,000 newborns in our region die. Why are we subject to such adversity? A woman who has just given birth, her milk turns out to be unsuitable for feeding a baby. So the only person fishermen can always rely on is Professor Matvey Panteleyevich Slavikov, someone who is always geared up to fight for the salvation of the sea, someone who is always there for Kakharman and Nasir. He speaks out against the construction of the Karakum Canal. But even the authority of a world-renowned scientist is not enough against those soulless people committed to destroy the sea. There were days when the land around the Aral Sea was a blooming oasis, and there was neither king nor pauper who wouldn't want to visit its shores. Not only Saigars inhabited this land, but also tigers. Many village people still have their floors decorated with these predators' striped hides. Hunter Musa has 2 hides in his possession, and this is really sad if you think about it. But now let's get back to our protagonist. Kakharman doesn't want to give up, so he tries to open a network of workshops in order to provide fishermen with jobs. And still, there is no support whatsoever from the authorities of the region. Fed up of struggle, Kakharman moves to Balkhash. There he worked for a year and a half when he suddenly realized that Lake Balkhash is also about to be destroyed. But is it possible to fight against those who want to ruin every single lake and river in the steppe? Unable to witness the death of the local Aral Sea, Kakharman leaves for Zaysan, where he works as a fisherman. The protagonist involuntarily remembers ancient storyteller Korkut, who fled from death several times. And then there is him, Kahraman, a man who is running away from dead water. He then realizes that it is not just him who is forced to flee, but all his people who have to wander without stopping once. And it seems to him that Professor Slavikov was right all along when he was saying that Kazakh people suffered because of the Soviet regime as no one else. After all, not only the Blue Sea is dying, the Yertis and Balkhash are deteriorating too. There were those Jambul chemicals, Guriev oil, Semey nuclear test site, Baikonur. The author lets his characters express his concerns. But no matter how far away Kahraman fled from the Aral Sea, he cannot help but come back again. He returns to see his family again, to see his motherland and the sea, which has turned into sand and salt. And the former fishermen have gone. They all have moved to different places. Some moved closer to the Caspian Sea, others traveled to Balkhash and Kapchagai. The rest got themselves livestock and became farmers. They started cultivating small patches of infertile land where nothing would ever grow again. They couldn't flee, they couldn't leave the graves of their ancestors behind. And although the merciless storm covered their crumbling shacks with sand, it still was their homeland. Kahraman's homeland welcomed its prodigal son back with the remnants of the formerly great sea ships, rusty and crumbling in the sand. He arrived at the place where there were lots of rusting hulls of fishing vessels, the former flotilla of the glorious Blue Sea. His first adolescent love, his first joy. From the distance, Kahraman noticed that some people were swarming around the old ships like ants. Welding sparks flashed brightly from the distance. One of the trawlers, Kazakhstan, was already completely cut into pieces. Kahraman came a bit closer. "Nice job. Who are you?" "We are Sea Cooperative," one of the guys answered eagerly, pulling up his face shield. "Why are you cutting those ships into pieces?" "We will sell them abroad," humorously answered the young man. "The country needs foreign currency, so the country will get it. There is no doubt about that." And how symbolic this episode is. Every line of this touching novel is literally saturated with symbols and allegories. And the reader is involuntarily seized by the sensation of doom and decay. Rollan Seisenbayev's The Dead Wander in the Sands epic novel is a great tragedy because in his book he primarily writes about how everything is predetermined in the world. This is a book about fatalism, about the death of the civilization of sedentary ants. But at the same time, the author manages to guide dying people to the path of salvation, and this is the way that leads back to their origins. The writer's optimistic philosophy gives us the hope that life on Earth, despite the most gloomy forecasts, will not get extinct. Rustem Jangujan, philosopher. The novel makes references to several other literary masterpieces. For example, its existentialism reminds us of The Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe. The theme of the environmental catastrophe evokes the associations with The Brand of Cassandra by Chingiz Aytmatov. And an attentive reader might even discover a certain philosophical parallel with The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. In this novel, the old man is Nasir, the protagonist who loses his battle with authorities and scientists. Also, the novel can be considered as a different interpretation of the Aral Sea. The book shows us the Aral Sea from a different perspective through the eyes of the stranger, someone who, unlike Nurpisov, wasn't born there. And still, the reference is recognizable as Seisenbayev's Kahraman reminds us of Jadigir, the protagonist of the Last Duty novel. Here is the same invincible and tough rebel who doesn't want to put up with the death of the sea. What we all should remember is that the Aral Sea tragedy can repeat itself more than once, and not just there, but anywhere in the world. Because people who conquer nature refuse to listen to its spirit. People have to stop and reconsider what they are doing. They have to listen carefully in order to understand. But so much time has passed since the novel was written, and still, no one wants to stop this. Yes, we got a part of the sea back, but the great Aral, alas, is irrevocably gone. And yet, just like Professor Slavikov, I truly want to believe that someday the big sea will come back.